The following program and contents, including the views and opinions expressed by the host and any guest speakers, are solely for informational and entertainment purposes. The views and opinions expressed are not endorsed or supported by REL-MAR McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, their employees, affiliates, or advertisers. The host and guest speakers are solely responsible for their own perspectives, and their views do not reflect those of REL-MAR McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, their employees, affiliates, or advertisers. The information provided in this program should not be considered as professional advice or as a substitute for professional consultation. Listeners and viewers are encouraged to form their own opinions and seek independent advice when necessary. REL-MAR McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, their employees, affiliates, and advertisers hereby disclaim any liability for any claims, damages, or losses incurred as a result of the information presented in this program.
Welcome to the Paranormal Stakeout radio TV show with Larry Lawson. As a former career law enforcement officer and law enforcement educator, Larry focuses on the use of tried and true law enforcement investigative techniques in conducting paranormal investigations. Despite his experience and training, Larry also keeps an open mind to discussions on topics that deal with evidence that are not quite as physical in nature. Paranormal Stakeout guests are professionals in the field of the paranormal and parapsychology, conducting the investigations and research needed to further the cause of paranormal study. Larry advocates an agenda of standardization of structure and training in the field of paranormal investigation and research for the purpose of one day being able to produce the evidence needed to convince a jury of the existence of the paranormal. Whether it is ghosts, UFOs, unsolved mysteries, hauntings or cryptids, no topic is beyond the investigative reach of Larry Lawson and the Paranormal Stakeout radio TV show team. Now, here is the host of the Paranormal Stakeout radio TV show, Larry Lawson.
And good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Paranormal Stakeout. As always, I'm your host, Larry Lawson, coming to you from the headquarters of the Florida Bureau of Paranormal Investigation and Indian River Hauntings in beautiful Vero Beach, Florida. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about those two organizations, check us out at paranormalfbi.com or indianriverhauntings.com. You can also see a little bit about what we do in the paranormal research realm on YouTube at Indian River Hauntings 2341. Also, you can check me out right here on the X-Zone Radio Broadcast Network by going to paranormalstakeout.org, and you can see all of my past programs as well as everything else. Now, if you'd like to send me a question, thoughts, or comments that I would love to bring up at the beginning of each show, you can email me at ghostguy@paranormalstakeout.org and send me your thoughts and comments. Would love to talk about it. It seems like lately, every time we've started the broadcast, there's something crazy going on in the world. We've just had another one up in the northeast part of our country, and I want to send our love and thoughts to everybody that was affected by the tragic events in the Lewiston, Maine area. Strange world we live in, and I want to see that everybody keeps focused. We're here to talk about the paranormal and things that we're trying to figure out and make sense of, but let's not lose sight of the things that are happening in our world today and pray for and think about those that are in need. So please keep that in mind. With that, tonight, I've got an interesting guest, Reverend Peter Panagore. Reverend Panagore is coming to us to discuss his experiences with near-death experience. Yes, he's crossed that line and come back. Reverend Panagore is recruited to TV as the fifth minister of America's oldest religious broadcast. His 2-minute spot aired for 15 years before the morning weather on NewsCenterMaine and two NBC stations, reaching up to 80,000 viewers a day. He previously served in New England as a minister for the United Church of Christ. He's an author. He's a broadcaster. He's also an individual that, as I said, experienced some very, very serious events. He was ice climbing in the world famous Lower Weeping Wall along the Icefields Parkway in Alberta, Canada, when he had a terrible accident and he passed over. And we're going to hear about that tonight, as well as other thoughts that Peter's going to bring to us. So with that, I'd like to welcome Peter Panagore to the show. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Larry. Thanks for having me here today.
It's an honor, trust me. If you could share with my audience a little bit about who you are and how you got to where you are today, if you can, and feel free to go right into what happened to you on that ice mountain.
Well, that's really how I ended up who I am today. I was a 20-year-old, had just had my birthday in 1980, and I didn't want to go home to Boston. I wanted to go on an adventure for spring break. So I found a fellow who had a trip planned, and I had been a mountaineer kind of person, wilderness camper, winter camper, national ski patrol, outdoor winter, outdoor summer, outdoor all the time. So we went on an 8-day snow caving backcountry expedition in Alberta, and we started on the in British Columbia. We started on the Alberta border. We skied in and then we skied out. And at the end of our trip, we had a great trip. We did a 1-day ice climb, and I'd never been ice climbing before. I'd been a technical climber. I'd done not a lot of rock, but enough rock and on many mountains. And Tim, my partner, was a certified lead climber. And I made a mistake to begin with. I talked him into letting me climb with one axe and a hammer. And you probably have seen ice climbers with these 2 axes climbing up. Well, I had one, and in my other hand, I had a hammer, which is about this long, which is a tool for ice climbing. It's used to put the ice screws in and take the ice screws out and chip the ice in. And it has a little bird beak serrated. You can plant it in the ice and it can hold as well as the axe holds. But the difference between them are twofold. One is the swing of the axe is much larger because it's got a longer handle. And also with the axe, you can plant it in the ice. It has a pick at the bottom, and you can let go of the handle and dangle on this strap that's about a third of the way up the shaft, and relax your arm and stay in position safely just by opening your hand. But you can't do that with a hammer. And with the hammer, I had to grip it the whole time and use my forearm, which burned me out. Those 2 things slowed our climb down. We made us twice as slow as everybody else on the climb that day, which meant that a couple of hours before sunset, we knew that we were in a very precarious position. It was a 500 or 600 foot climb, and the climb itself went very well, just very slowly. And the further I got along, the more tired I became, the slower I became. So by the time we actually reached the top of our climb, the sun set, temperature dropped about 30 degrees, and hypothermia had an immediate onset. So that's the beginning of it all. And we fought our way off the mountain. We knew that we were going to die because we were isolated. The temperature had dropped. Our hypothermia was advancing rapidly. And we figured we were going to die where we were, or we were going to die trying to get off the mountain. And we decided to do the latter part in the dark.
So the rest of your climbers were way past you, and they couldn't.
They were gone. They had gone. They descended and they'd left. I should set the scene. It was right on the Icefields Parkway. There's a parking lot across the street. There's a day climb. Everybody knows it's day climb. And everybody else had descended. They had left and driven away.
I see.
We were by ourselves in the middle of the wilderness. And even though we were near the highway, this is still wilderness. This is the middle of the Canadian Provincial Park Service. It's just nowheresville.
So you're coming off the mountain. You're obviously you've almost convinced yourself, not convinced, but you've realized the fact that you may not make it out. What happened then?
Oh, well, we knew we weren't going to make it out. I'd been on the National Ski Patrol since I was in high school, and we had just had a refresher course. I was volunteer at Bridger Bowl in Bozeman, Montana. We just had a refresher course on hypothermia and frostbite because we had a day on the mountain where it was 50 below zero. And so we were pulling people off with frostbite and hypothermia throughout the day. So I recognized immediately as we began our violent shivers. So as soon as the sun went down, all of the muscles in my body independently of each other. So there wasn't one pulse. There was a million independent pulses of all the muscles in my body twitching by themselves on their own rhythm. And a clattering jaw like you see in the cartoons. My whole body's shaking. I can't hardly talk. And we realized that we were going to die where we were sitting, or we were going to die trying to get off. And so that's what we decided to do to fight our way down. So I could tell you the whole long high adventure of it. And it was pretty high adventure. We made some mistakes. Cold steals your reason. The colder your brain gets, the more confused a person becomes. I became, and the poorer choices that I made as a result, it stole my coordination. It locked up my muscles, so it made everything difficult to move. My eyeballs, I could feel my eyeballs freezing. My tongue became difficult to manipulate to speak. The cold was like fire inside of me and burning me all around. Yeesh. Every time I tell this story, part of me goes back there, and it was the most traumatic experience. I've lived a very adventurous life, and it was the most traumatic experience I have ever had. I kept my fear under control, under mental, organized, forceful control, as did Tim. Neither of us panicked. And we drove ourselves through the night through a traverse, a repel, a traverse, a repel. And as we went along, it got colder and colder. And we had no food with us. We had water because there was ice. We could suck on the ice, but we had nothing to fuel ourselves.
Because it was a day hike.
It was a day climb, and none of the other teams brought up gear to spend the night. Nobody brought up extra food. We brought up some extra food, but we ate it. It was gone.
Yeah.
Nobody.
So what you're in this precarious situation. You realize that you may not make it out. What happened then, and how did you get out?
Well, we made it to the final rappel, and that was about 100, 150 feet up, and it had iron pins epoxied into the mountain. Somebody drilled a hole and epoxied in a pin with a ring on it and a carabiner and a strap and another carabiner. So we were clipped into the mountain finally, like sometime very late, early morning hours. We had fought our way through the night and through the dark to get to this place. So we weren't going to fall for the first time. And we were only 100, 150 feet up, and the car was right across the street with the tent in it. So we could, if we could get there, we could get ourselves safe. But I had the rope. Tim was to my left, and he was clipped in on this situation as I was standing on this ledge. And I had the rope, and I took off my mittens, and I tied a knot of one end of the rope to my harness so I wouldn't drop it. I took the other end, and I threw it out around the corner of this cliff, kind of this vertical cliff like that, into this crag. And I pulled on the rope, and the first pull, it got stuck somewhere up in the dark around the corner. And the more I pulled it, the tighter it became. So now we were in this situation where we couldn't go up after the rope to pull it down, and we couldn't descend. And that was it. There was no movement from this position. And so we stood there as I kept trying to pull on the rope, and hypothermia continued to advance. I unzipped my coat at one point, which I knew better than, because I know better than to do that. But I was still feeling hot because I felt all of the blood rush from my extremities into my core. And I had this, I remember feeling or thinking, I need my heart and my lungs and my gut. I don't really need my feet and my knees. I can lose those to the ice. And as long as this part of me is warm, I'll be okay. And that's what I was thinking when I unzipped my coat. And Tim yelled at me, "Zip up your coat." And I didn't do it because I didn't care. And then I had this peace flow over me when I realized, because I had enough mental capacity, that I recognized the symptoms, and I thought, oh, this is it. I'm done for now. And this peace settled over me when a piece of not desiring to stay alive. I accepted my position. I accepted my fate. And I stopped fighting, and I started thinking about my parents, and I started thinking about uh, God, and I began to fall asleep. And I would crash like blackness would come, like in an instant, blackness would come and I'd
Mhm.
fall asleep and I'd crash down to the rock, I'd stand back up and pull in the rope. And that happened a bunch of times. And I stood back up this last time and I had tunnel vision. And this tunnel vision, which I'd never seen before, began to collapse very rapidly into a narrow field. And as it collapsed very rapidly, I thought, what is this thing I'd never seen before? And I started looking around and it kind of followed my vision and got smaller and smaller. And I was looking right at the mountain as it got really, 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 really small. And I thought to myself, I must be falling asleep again.
On that note, as much as I want to hear, I want to hear the rest of this. So we got to take our first break. Folks, stay with us as we continue this compelling story and we hear what the results were. So stay with us. We'll be back after these messages. And we are back with my guest, Reverend Peter Panagore. I really hated to break at that moment because we just got to the point where that tunnel had closed, and I'll let you pick it up from there.
So as the tunnel closed, I began to think that I was falling asleep. But when the tunnel went to black, I didn't fall asleep. I became awake in a new way. The All of my pain of my physical body that I'd been struggling with all night long vanished. And I was confused about what was happening. I didn't understand where my pain had went. I didn't understand what was going on with me. I couldn't. I thought to myself, I must have fallen, but why do I feel like I'm standing? How can I be standing if I fell asleep? I was very confused. But the space in front of me where the mountain had been expanded into a darkness that was gigantic. And I was still in a human form, but I had no pain. And as I floated there, stood there looking in the direction of this darkness, way, way far in the distance, this tiny, tiny pinprick of light appeared and rushed toward me, covering this distance faster than the speed of light because this was a massive expanse. And as it rushed toward me, it expanded and it communicated to me. I say telepathically, but that implies language. There was no language. It spoke to me inside myself without words at all. And it communicated to me in an instant that it was coming to take me. And I replied in my mind, "I'm not going anywhere. I don't know what's going on, but I'm staying right where I am." And I sort of took all my willpower that I had used to fight my way across the mountain all night and put it up as a shield, which amounted to onion paper. And it poked right through this and grasped me and pulled me out. And it pulled me out and it enwrapped me inside itself. And it was known to me. It wasn't my first time I had encountered this angelic being. I had encountered it as a child. It had come when I was a kid. So I knew it, but I also was resisting because I didn't want to go anywhere because I didn't understand what was going on. But as soon as it enveloped me, I was inside of it, and it was gigantic. It was 10,000 times bigger than me, and I was in the middle of it. And my physical body had been shed. I was in a what I describe. Everything I'm saying right now is in metaphor because there is no thing that is the thing there. There's no molecules. There's no electrons, no photons, no quarks. It is an entirely different structure of existence. And so I describe myself as having the shape of a human being, but I was made of light. And I was inside of this angelic being, which was communicating to me massive ultimate intelligence, massive ultimate compassion. And it was telling me, you're coming with me and showing me itself. And what I could see of it was that I described it as being superpositioned. So I knew that it was this angelic being was there for me, but I could also tell that it was directly connected to the infinite that I couldn't perceive, but I knew was vaster than this angelic being, which was somehow connected to it and reduced at the same time. There's a lot of paradox in my story. And so I'm being swept back up, back in the direction that it had come, up an escalator, up an elevator, up a tunnel, however you want to talk about it. Same journey, same railroad tracks. And I was superpositioned. I had another location outside of this where I was like an eye of God, and I could see myself inside the angelic being. And as me being inside the angelic being would look over to see this eye of myself, I couldn't see it. So I could see me and I couldn't see me, and I was in two places at the same time. And so I was swept up this direction. And then this angelic being got to the kind of that edge space where the pinprick had first appeared, and it unfolded itself. I popped out of it. It opened up, and I was suddenly inside a much vaster, much larger, universal size darkness, empty darkness. But this darkness was paradoxically filled with light. I could see in every direction. And I had become an orb of consciousness. And this is metaphor. I became a large energy being, and my thinking and my self and my sensing, they were one thing. They weren't separate things. As I thought, so I was. And I remembered myself. I thought, this is who I am. I've always been this. Why? How did I forget who I am? And I was in comfort and contentment, and all of my pain had gone. All of my suffering was gone. Every part of my human life was forgotten, not needed.
Question for you. Did you feel as if you were part of something bigger, something obviously beyond you, but did you feel like you were part of a collective at
Well,
all?
yes, my story is rather long and lots of things happened, and I tell it in a chronology, but it's timelessness. It all happened at once from my point of
Mhm.
view. At one stage of my near-death experience, I did experience that, where I became inflated, infilled by the fullness of the light itself, and I became in union with it. I
Mhm.
was in oneness with this, and I had no self left, but a tiny little smidgen, just a tiny little smidgen. And one more drop of this union, I would have been annihilated and folded back into this entity, this being, this light, this love beyond comprehension, unimaginable love that
Mhm.
I also experienced as I was like a singular photon, and there was a field of photons, and there was a septillion photons in this field, and it was the divine itself. It was them, the many, and they were one, and I was part of it, and yet I was somehow outside of it, and a reduction of it, limited from the unlimited. So them and one and me.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I understand. So continue on. You're in this situation. What happened next, and how did you come to? How did you come out of it? If that's a good way to put it.
I asked to come back.
Okay.
So I'll give you the speedy journey through what
Okay.
happened to me. I went through. I saw my original self. When I say I saw it, I experienced my original self being called into being. I saw and
Mhm.
understood and experienced my everlasting nature. I saw my original self. I saw my soul self that it had incarnations, and I also went through a hell to get there. So as I was first seeing the divine being having it had appeared to me, I should back up and say it suddenly the darkness that I was in had an opening in it, and through this opening, light poured like a waterfall, like a the tallest waterfall you can imagine, most beautiful, most seductive, most desirous, and it was made up of a billion different electromagnetic wave colors and X-rays and infrared and electromagnetic stuff, you colors we don't have here, and it was
Mhm.
simultaneously all of these colors and white light at the same time and most beautiful, and I went to it and it with a thought, and I moved toward it as it came to me, and I touched it with my being, and then it infilled me. And as it infilled me and surrounded me and I went into it, it showed me my human self. It showed me my just previous life. It was like a big, huge burning eye looked inside the life I had just lived and had shown me all of the dark corners of myself where there was nothing hidden of me. And as it's and I was trying to hide these things. And as I tried to
Mhm.
hide them, I couldn't. And it kept saying to me, I love you. I have always loved you. I made you. I was with you as you did all these things, and my love is unending. I love you even though you did these things. And then I went through this chronology of all of the pain that I caused everyone in my life, from the inside of their bodies, feeling what I did to them from their point of view, simultaneous with my point of view, which is all the reasons why I was causing their pain. And was in comparison to the unlimited purity of divine being. And I wasn't judged. This purity of divine being didn't judge me. I judged myself in comparison to this unlimited love. I saw my smallness. And as I saw my
Okay.
smallness, I also heard and felt all of the love that I was being awashed with. I love you. I have always loved you. I forgive you. Come to me. Come to me. Come to me. And as I listened to it, I turned toward it, and then I was infilled by it. And
Mhm.
all of my suffering went away, and I entered into this state of peace, bliss, adoration, awe, understanding, knowledge, truth, and a whole bunch of things happened. In almost toward the end of the experience, meanwhile, the divine being is welcoming me home. Come home, come home, come home. And I said, what about my parents? I could still see them. And I was shown the universe, our universe, and I was shown the origin of our universe. There was this infinite darkness that I couldn't see into, and out of this darkness poured our universe, just like spilled out as light, and then this light became overlaid with the matter of and energy of our universe as a darkness that hid the light inside it. But I could see the light inside of everything there was, on all the people on earth as well. And I saw my parents' faces, and I saw two sets of my parents' faces, mom and dad A, mom and dad B. Mom and dad A, I saw their lives without me and the great amount of suffering that they were going to incur. And then I saw their lives in mom and dad B with me, and I saw a lesser amount of suffering. And I saw their end of life in both of these, mom A and B and dad A and B. And in the end of their lives, they came to this place of unending love in which I was, because all of the love that was woven through all of our universe was poured directly at me. And I felt like I was the most beloved that had ever been made. But I could see that every human being, because I could see all human beings, lifetime on earth, like a hologram, I could see that every one of them was beloved as well. And I could see that no one was lost, that all things are made out of the divine and nothing is lost. Everything comes back into the love itself. And so I saw my parents suffering and their less suffering, and I recognized the length of my human life was a snap of the fingers. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I can go back and alleviate some of their suffering. And so I asked, I said, I know you're welcoming me home. You're telling me it's time to come home, but I haven't gone all the way quite yet, have I? No, the answer came back. And I said, well, can I go back and be with my parents and alleviate their suffering? And the voice said, yes. And I said, well, can I come back here to this paradise? And the voice said, yes. I said, well, I choose to live my life. And the voice said, you won't live your life, and sent me out. And as I
Mhm.
was sent out, I was reduced again. I was back inside this angelic being, and I was
Yep.
being compressed.
To do this to you, but we've got to
That's
take
all
the
right.
next break.
Sure, cool.
But hold that thought, folks. You'll want to hear more of this, so stay with us. We'll be back right after these messages. And welcome back to Paranormal Stakeout with my guest tonight, Reverend Peter Panagore. It seems like I keep interrupting you right at the right time here, wrong time, I should say. So, Peter, you've asked to come home. You want to alleviate your parents' pain. You want to continue on. Tell us tell us what happened then, and how did you get out of the predicament on the mountain? That's
Well, that I'll tell you that in just a moment because I'll be there quick as a wink.
Shortly. Okay.
I was kicked out of heaven, basically. I was invited to stay, and then once I'd made my choice, I was sent away and was being compressed back into a human form, more denser and denser. And as I was being carried out of heaven, a million doorways appeared in front of me, and sort of like a flower petal pattern, and in the center of them was a beam of white light that was emanating from this darkness that was the divine heaven that I had just been in, and it was radiating out in a decreasing fashion to the edge of this all these doors, and the voice, this angelic being, which was also the voice of the divine, who had no gender and no religion, by the way, said to me, "Choose." I had to choose a door, and so and it told me to choose light, and I saw the light, and I loved the light, and I wanted the light, but I also wanted some humanity, because I knew that I was going back with a mission. I had been told that I had a job to do, and I realized that in order to be heard, if I was going to talk about my experience, I had to have as much humanity as I possibly could, and be a full human being, and so I made choices about that, and a door opened, and I went into this tunnel, and it was in the edge of the light. It wasn't out of the light. It was still in the light. And as I went down this tunnel, was carried down this tunnel, there were all these other doors inside the same tunnel. And in this, all these other doors led to all the other tunnels that I didn't choose. And they were all the choices I could make in my life. And at the end of my tunnel, I ended up just outside a body on the cliff. And I could see this body on the cliff. I could see two people. I could see this one person shaking the other person. I didn't know who they were. And my angel shoved me inside my body, like cut me open with its I don't know, its blade of light, or I'm not sure exactly how it did it, but it sliced open my body and shoved me inside like it felt like I was being twisted in like a very grindy sort of thing, and right inside. And then I'm inside this physical form, and now I'm much smaller than I was before, and it's very compressed, and I'm wondering what's going on, and I can see out this slit back toward heaven. I can see the angelic being. I can see back to the darkness, and then the slit closed like that, and I was stuck inside this thing, and I didn't know where I was, and I didn't understand what was going on. And then the brain of this thing, because I had consciousness outside of my brain. I felt the brain come on. I was like, "Oh, there's the brain coming on." I didn't know that that's what I called it, but I just felt this kind of like whirring up of a motor, and the brain came back online, and then my ears started working, and I started hearing noise, and I felt this thing shaking, and all of my pain returned. So it was like one of those medieval torture chambers with the iron body with the spikes on the inside, and there's somebody on the inside, and they close the door, and so it felt like I was in this great suffering that I had forgotten about suffering. Suffering didn't exist for me in heaven. It wasn't that oh yeah, I used to suffer. There was no, oh yeah, there was just no suffering. And so now I'm in this body full of suffering that's being shaken, and I can hear this noise, and I open my eyes and I hear, "Don't die, don't die, don't die." And there's Tim right in my face, and he's shaking my body, and he's crying, and he's screaming. Only I don't know who he is, and I begin to understand the language. "Don't die, don't die, don't die." And he sees my eyes open, and he's like, "Yeah, you were dead. I thought you were dead." And he pulls me up, and he's talking to me, and I don't have any idea who I am or who he is. I don't know where I am. I don't know what's going on. I'm just know that I'm in the world of suffering again. And as my brain came back online again, and I began to understand, oh, this guy is Tim. We're up on this ice cliff, but I still know that this isn't me. I'm inside of this thing. I feel like I'm in a biological robot, and I'm software. I have an app inside this robot, and most of my software is still up above in the cloud. So Tim finally tells me to pull the rope, and I pull the rope, and the rope comes free in the first pull. And maybe because the other times I had fallen asleep, I landed a certain way on the rock. And this time when I had died, I kind of fell off the rock. I'm not sure exactly why the rope came free, miraculous maybe, but the rope came free, and we descended, and we got the tent, and we self-treated for hypothermia. And by sometime after sunup, we were warm enough to get into the car and fire up the heater and continue to heat our bodies. So we self-rescued. And
Wow.
yeah.
So many questions, but the first one, when did you begin to realize you were Peter again, but still had a memory of what occurred? And how did you put all that together? How did you rationalize that?
I couldn't rationalize it. I knew that I wasn't Peter. I lived in this conflicted state. I knew that I wasn't this thing, and everybody around me. So we had a whole lot of other things happen on the way home. We ended up getting and being in jail for a while, and we totaled the car, and all sorts of things. I had to hitchhike. I had to lie my way across the border. All sorts of things happened. And when I got back to the university, everybody was treating me as if I was the same person, and I was not the same person at all. I had the same characteristics. I had the same accent. I looked the same. I had the same allergies, but I knew inside myself that I was this higher being inhabiting this body. I could see, it was like I was living up here, looking through my eyes, or living up here and feeling with this weird appendage that had this, these, I could manipulate this thing. Took
Well,
me. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, it's gonna have to. Do you remember your family at all? I mean, did you have the memories of your youth
Oh,
still?
everything came back. On my brain, I remembered everything that had happened to me when my brain came back intact. But I also knew that I wasn't this human being anymore, and that I inhabited this body, and I was completely lost in the world, because the world to me now looked like a two-dimensional, flat, black and white sheet through which beamed everywhere the divine light in a much reduced fashion from what I had been in. But there was light in everything, everywhere. But the whole thing was kind of celluloid thin and flickering and cheap and less than. And I was in despair over my choice. I knew I'd made a choice, but I immediately decided I didn't want to be here anymore. It took me close to 40 years. I'm 40 years out from this event now, and it's taken me that long to integrate. It's a continual process. I faked it for a long time, and I had the help of Kriya Yoga and centering prayer and meditation, and I discovered I was going to become an architect. I was an English major undergrad, but I was going to architecture school to join the family business for graduate school, and I trashed that idea, and I went to divinity school and I studied mysticism, and I found in the ancient mystical texts people like me who described experiences like I had had. And so they helped me understand who I was, but I kept it hidden for 20 years. I didn't tell anybody. I told my wife, I told one or two friends, and that's it, because it was too crazy. I didn't want to lose my credibility, and I didn't want to end up in an insane asylum.
How did you explain it to your parents? I mean, obviously they were planning on you joining the family business, and now you've got. Where did you get your Master of Divinity from? And how did that?
Yale University.
Okay.
And oddly enough, as I was applying to Yale, I also applied to satisfy my family. I got into Georgia Tech Graduate School of Architecture. Like, walked in the dean's office, talked to him, and he's like, "Yeah, just put in your application. You're in." Showed him my portfolio, and talked to my dad. And so I told my parents nothing. They knew that I had changed. I told them that my mom always knew that I had this kind of spiritual, mystical thing going on as a kid because of what had happened to me as a child. So she's like, "Well, that kind of makes sense, but we really wish you would come into the family business, because my sister was in graduate school at the time, and we had all these skyscraper dreams." And I just didn't care what they said. And I decided this is what I was going to do, and that's what I did. And I applied to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, and I got into Princeton, and I got into Yale. And when my parents were like, "Oh, you're going to Yale? Okay, I guess that's okay." And so, it was like, "All right, okay. And now what are you going to do with this crazy idea of yours? And going to divinity school, are you going to be a minister? What are you going to be, a professor? What are you going to do?" And I had decided to become a professor, but the dean of students let me do this 3-year independent study, found a pile of money to help me do this, to study mysticism, and never told her why either. And when I finally told my parents, I didn't tell my parents until my book was coming out. because I came out to my congregation. I was a United Church of Christ minister in this town where I live still, in this coastal town in Maine. And there was this huge embezzlement in the church that lasted a decade,
Mm,
and it was a terrible thing. It was big news. You got family is in Maine, I think, and it was in the papers. They probably read about it back then, um, and I came out to my congregation as a result of that. And then I told my parents, and they did not believe me. And so when the book started coming out, I was like, "Look, Mom, Dad, I'm serious enough about this that I'm willing to put myself out in public with this." And they're like, "Okay, all right." So they understood that something had happened to me, but they never really believed me. And I long ago gave up on the idea of trying to convince anybody what happened to me was real. I couldn't. It's completely subjective. I can't prove this to anybody. But my
and isn't
life. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's the one problem that we face in the field outside of the science that we know. You can't prove it. In fact, your story uh, is similar in many ways, but different than a lot of other folks that have had near-death experiences. Um, what do you think made yours different or the same as others?
Well, there's a great similarity in that many of us, maybe not all of us, but many of us encounter this overwhelming light and unconditional love that's
Mhm.
eternal, everlasting, and unbreakable. And that's exactly what I experienced. All the rest of the stuff that happened to me, I feel like I'd been prepped my whole life. I had had a whole series of mystical experiences starting from when I was a child, and I
Mhm.
never I never understood them. They had no context. They would change me. I became a different kind of person every time, which is kind of why my mom thought I had this mystical thing going on. I was raised Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox, and I went to
Ah,
Catholic school, a Catholic high school, and so I had this traditional sort of Catholic Orthodox kind of upbringing. But
you,
even though
yeah.
those two churches hated each other and were at war for centuries, um, the so it was so there was kind of understandable. But my mystical experiences, I didn't tell anybody about them. I had the first one when I was 5, and I told my mom, and I
Well,
learned to.
let's hold up on that one
Okay,
because we're up
another
at our
break.
next break. But
All right.
when we get back, I want to hear about because you'd mentioned it earlier about an experience as a child. So that's where I want to go next. So folks, stay with us. We'll be back after these messages. You got to hear the rest of this. So join us. And we're back with my guest, Reverend Peter Panagore. Just a fantastic story and what you've went through. We're going to get right back into that in a minute, but I just want to remind everybody if you want to learn more about my organizations, paranormalfbi.com or indianriverhauntings.com. Take you to our websites. You can find out a little bit more about us, our YouTube channel at Indian River Hauntings 2341. Uh, Also, I got to remind everybody, check out the other great programming on the X Zone Radio and TV network at xzoneradiotv.com or xzbn.net. So see all the other great shows on here. Peter, how can folks get a hold of you and tell us a little bit about the book your books?
I'm found at peterpanagore.love, peterpanagore.love, and I have a YouTube channel. You can find me on YouTube, Peter Panagore. The book became an international Audible bestseller and has been optioned for a film that I've been working on for the past couple of years. And I should be done my responsibility for the contract, hopefully by the first of the year, and then we're off to pre-production.
Excellent, excellent. So do check that out, folks. Um, let's pick it up now. You had experience as a child. You mentioned that earlier in the show that the beings what you felt wasn't unusual to you because you had experienced an angel earlier in your life.
Same
Tell
one.
us a little bit okay, tell us about that.
So when I was a little kid. I was 5 years old, kindergarten kid, and I was gonna try to scare my sisters. They were getting off they'd gone to Catholic school, and they were getting off the bus, and so I decided to climb this little tiny tree in the side yard and jump down on them when they walked into the yard. And so I was hiding in this tree, and it was the autumn or late. It was like September, and it was a maple tree, and all these two-tone maple leaves were flipping back and forth, and they mesmerized me. And as I got mesmerized, I suddenly sort of became very peaceful. And as this peace settled into me, this roaring ocean sound began blasting behind me. It felt like it dropped down behind me, and then this huge noise, and then the noise came inside of me, and it grabbed me, and it pulled me up this route, up this, people call it the silver cord. It pulled me up, and it was this angelic being, and I could see myself in the tree as I was traveling up, and I had a light body again, and I could see my house, and I could see the curvature of the earth, and we got up into the atmosphere, and then it transformed into this darkness. And so I'm in this darkness for the first time, but I'm inside the angelic being, and it becomes like a room for me, like a big bubble, and it's transparent, and I can see out into the darkness, and I'm inside of this bubble, and I can see the little boy in the tree, and I know that I'm not him, but he's part of me, but I'm not him. And then this bubble opened. And as this bubble opened, I got sucked out of it, and I got brought into this darkness where I still had my light body form. And in this darkness, I experienced infinity. I experienced creation and power and allness. And then I was brought back inside the bubble, and the darkness followed me in and began to take form, and this form shifted 10,000 times, 10,000 different forms, different colors, different densities, different materials, and it was speaking to me, and it
Mhm.
said to me, I and this is just a little boy's language, I'm God, and you have a pre-birth deal with me. You work for me. Do you remember? I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, I remember. I work for you. And when I said that, I got sent back down and stuffed back in my body again. And then one in different forms, 2, 3, 4, 5 other times, including 2 when I was in college the year before, I had more experiences of this divine entity, but they never really made sense. They were individual experiences. They changed me. I became a different person each time, a modified person, born again, you could say. But at my near death experience, all of those things kind of fell into place. I felt like I'd been, I was given this choice to come back, but I also felt like I had this lifelong setup for this thing. I feel like my whole
Mhm.
life is like that. I have this lifelong setup where all these things happen to me that lead me to the point of the next spiritual experience, and then all the previous spiritual experiences sort of add into that. Um, and so, well, I know my near death experience is different than other people's, and so what I did when I wrote the book is I didn't read other people's near death experiences. I just wrote down what happened to me, and I told my publisher, you know, uh, he said, "You should read these other books. We gotta get comparative so we know how to market it." And I was like, "Yeah, but if I read these other books, their thinking is going to impact my thinking, and then I'd rather just tell my story and let it stand or fall on its own." And
Mhm.
so I didn't know anybody else's NDE when I told my story, and it turns out that mine
Okay.
is similar to some people and different from others.
Do you think possibly the differences could be the, the biologics in us and what we've experienced may have shaped how people have seen it?
I think
How people have experienced it, I guess, is a better way to say
Yeah,
it.
and I think it works the other way too. On the way back in, the
Mhm.
biologics, the experience of life is a filter through which this thing is expressed. And
Okay.
so if I were, a Hindi, of some Hindu cult, not cult, but some Hindu sect, I mean, in Bombay, and raised with Ganesh, my experience afterwards, my interpretation of my experience would be filtered through that.
Mm.
And but the purity of it is inexpressible. So it's always filtered through, and it's always inexpressible because there's no language on the other side. But I also think that my experience, it's kind of a Catholic experience. I went to hell, and I didn't get judged. I judged myself, but I did go through a hellish kind of experience. And a lot of other NDErs, they don't have that. And some NDErs see Jesus. I didn't see Jesus. Um, some people go to this place where it's like a meadow. I didn't go to a meadow. um, I don't know why it works that way, but I do think this, that the divine gives each one of us an experience that helps us when we come back here to live, to reorient our lives toward love and light. So it's sort of a custom job of compassion.
Mhm. Mhm. Now, you actually had a second event, if I'm not mistaken.
I did in 2015. My family has a congenital heart thing going on,
Mhm.
killing us, widowmaker heart attacks.
Yep.
And I had a widowmaker heart attack in 2015. What that means is that I had 100% blockage.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you sound like you might know from personal experience what I'm talking
Not
about.
personal experience,
Uh,
I mean, I know somebody that should have gone. In fact, they were gone, and they came back after a widowmaker heart attack, so
only 6% survival rate with widowmaker heart
yeah.
attacks. And so
Mhm.
I died in the ambulance. I live in a pretty rural place. By the time I got in the ambulance, my golden hour of survivability had already passed. And then I had
Mhm.
an hour and a half ride in summer tourist traffic to the Portland
Mhm.
Medical Center, to Maine Medical Center in the cath lab, and I died on the way. In my experience there, I didn't go very far. I came out of my body, and the angelic being, now speaking in the plural, come to us, we've been waiting for you, it's your time to come to us, we love you, we love you, we love you, come, 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 come. And it came down to me, and I thought to myself, I've been waiting for this my whole life, I've been waiting to get out of here. And so I started to go, and as I started to go, I thought to myself, well, wait a second, I got to think this over. If I have a minute here before I leave, I got to check on everybody, make sure everybody's all set. And so I kind of went back into the cave of myself, my human self. And I
Mhm.
wasn't inhabiting my body, but I could see into it. And I have a son, and he had been at the emergency room with me, and he had leaned into me and squeezed my hand and said, "I love you, Dad." And when I saw his face, I saw that he wasn't ready for me to go. And then I
Mhm.
saw my daughter, who had just left her moral injured husband from Afghanistan with the
Mm.
baby, and we had just rescued her and the baby, and I saw my baby, my granddaughter's life with me and without me.
Mhm.
And the same thing that happened with my parents, and I saw much better with me. So I turned around and I went back out, and the angelic being had like politely stepped aside for a bit, with standing on the corner whistling, waiting for me to finish my conversation, kind of thing. And then it came back to me, come to us, come to us, come to us. And I said, if it's all the same to you, and time is timelessness here, and I'm gonna come back to this paradise, I think I'll go back in and stick around there for as long as they need me. And I turned around and I went back inside my body.
I'm not gonna give you too many more chances, Peter.
Oh, I hope not. I hope the third time's a charm. That's what I'm
Here here's
fingers
a
crossed.
here's a question for you. You, had talked about when you came back after the incident on the mountain, that you really you had your memories, you know who you were, but you really weren't that person. How come that didn't happen, A, when the incidents when you were younger and this last incident? What kept you from feeling that way again? Or
Oh, uh, when I was a child, every time I was raptured into ecstasy. Every time that happened, I had a cord attached to my body. I was still
Mhm.
attached. But when I died that first time, there was no attachment to my body. There was no silver cord attachment. It was severed. And the power of my experience of being in oneness, in unity, where I
Mhm.
lost all sense of myself, that
Mhm.
came back with me. And so I came back carrying this extra load of energy. Every single mystical experience I've ever had in my life, and I include my near death experiences in that group, including my second near death experience, I came back a different person, to different degrees, to different extents.
Mhm.
My first NDE was radically transformative. My second NDE was transformative in that I decided to go all in. I had this TV show in Maine, and when I was in the when I was in the hospital bed, they called me and said, "Oh, the TV station has just been purchased along with 40 other stations by this other corporation, and we're going to phase out your show." So I was going to lose my job, and and my book was coming out. Amazon launched my book a month early while I was still in the hospital recovering. And I realized that I didn't care anymore whether people believed me or they didn't believe me. I now had this opportunity. I only had so much time left till I die, third time's a charm. And I had a job to do, and I had to be all in. So that I did change. And my change was I wasn't going to hide anymore. I was coming out of the closet slowly, the near-death experience closet slowly. But after that second near-death experience, I'm all in, which is why I'm here today in your show.
Well, and I truly appreciate it. And we've got so many more things I'd like to chat with you about. I would really like to delve into a little bit. I wish we had more time to delve in deeper to some of those experiences, and maybe we can do that again at another time. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. So, Peter, thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing your story with us. And I want to thank all of you out there for listening and your support. And just remember that life is short. Take care of your family, hug your kids, hug your significant other. Most importantly, take care of yourselves. Until we meet again, we'll see you on the other side. Have a good night.